This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMUDSTA to get you 5% off anything on the site. Or if you're in Canada like me, you can use the same promo code at Multizone to get 10% off your orders of singles. If cards aren't what you're looking for, Original Magic Art has playmats, tokens, and sweet art that you can use that same promo code to help you get 5% off your order there. If you're looking to bling out your cards, using Alter Sleeves is a great way to do so, and you can click the affiliate link in my About section to help out the channel as you make an order. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today is another Multizone matchup with 4 brand new faces joining us for some EDH gameplay. First up we have Sebastian playing his Aminatou deck. He keeps Austere Command, Lithiform Engine, Soul Herder, Bright Climb Pathway, Commander's Sphere, and Mismeta Witch. Maxwell is playing Nekusar, keeping 2 Swamps, Arcane Signet, Soul Ring, Island, Nightscape Familiar, and a Swan Song. Kilby is playing Zurgo, keeping Shadow Spear, Anguished Unmaking, Isolated Chapel, Plains, Utter End, Command Beacon, and Kargan Dragonlord. Marie is playing Tymna and Ikra, and she keeps a Vault of the Archangel, 2 Plains, a Swamp, Bolas' Citadel, Heliod Sun Crowned, and Ghostly Prison. Sebastian wins the die roll and starts us off. He plays a Bright Climb Pathway, passing. Maxwell plays a Swamp and casts Soul Ring. He taps the Soul Ring for Arcane Signet and passes while the table sits in awe of his mana. Kilby plays a Command Beacon and taps it for 1 to cast Shadow Spear. It's not quite the Soul Ring he was hoping for, and he passes to Marie. Marie plays her Plains and passes. Sebastian draws and passes. Maxwell plays an Island for turn and pays for a Nightscape Familiar. He passes to Kilby after that. Kilby plays a Plains and passes. Marie plays a Swamp and also passes. Sebastian draws and has to pass, discarding down to 7. Maxwell draws for turn and casts Nekusar for a reduced cost thanks to the Nightscape Familiar. He then plays a Tap Myriad Landscape, passing. Kilby draws 2 and loses 2 because of Nekusar, and he plays a Foily Plains. He then passes turn. Marie draws her 2 and takes 2, and then casts Tymna and passes. Sebastian draws his 2, takes 2 as well, and then has to discard as he passes. Maxwell draws his 2 and plays an Evolving Wilds as his land for turn, and cracks it to go and find a basic. He puts out a Tap Mountain, and then taps the Soul Ring to crack the Myriad Landscape, going to find 2 Swamps. He moves to combat, swinging Nekusar and the familiar Kilby. Kilby draws 2 and takes 2. He plays a Swamp and then casts Utter End, exiling Nekusar. Marie only draws 1 for her turn and plays a Forest. She taps 3 mana for Heliod Sun Crowned and moves to combat. Tymna goes swinging at Kilby, and she gains 2 and gets to put a counter onto Tymna from Heliod, and in her post-combat main phase, loses 1 to draw a card from Tymna's ability. Sebastian draws and finally finds that second land. He plays Caves of Koilos and then taps both for an Orzhov Signet, slowly getting back into the game. Maxwell plays a Swamp for turn and taps enough to recast Nekusar. 4 mana then gets him a Silent Arbiter and he passes turn. Kilby draws 2 and takes 2. He plays Dragonskull Summit, which lets him tap out for Zurgo. He goes straight at Marie for some revenge, dealing 7 and passing. Marie draws her 2 and takes 2. She plays a Forest and puts out Ghostly Prison. She then casts her own copy of Shadow Spear and moves to combat. Tymna goes at Kilby, who does not appreciate the hits. This has Marie gaining 3, adding another counter onto Tymna, but she decides not to draw an extra card and passes to Sebastian. Sebastian draws his 2 and takes 2. He plays a Temple of the False God, which doesn't do a heck of a lot right now, but he is able to tap enough to cast Commander's Sphere and passes. Maxwell draws his 2 and then taps enough for a Guild Feeder, which is a fun card. He swings Nekusar at Sebastian and passes. Kilby draws 2 and takes 2. He plays an isolated chapel and taps enough for a Boros Signet. He then gears up Zurgo with the Shadow Spear and moves to combat. Zurgo can't ignore the challenges coming from Tymna, so Kilby swings at Marie, paying the 2 to the Ghostly Prison. Marie takes 8 and Kilby gains 8, and he then passes turn. Marie draws 2 and loses 2. She plays a Vesuva and has it come in as a copy of the Temple of the False God, and then casts an Ikra. Moving to combat, Marie won't back down and goes at Kill Me with Tymna. She connects, which has Marie gaining 4 life from Tymna and adds a counter to Tymna, and then 5 more life from Ikra's ability and adds another counter. In her post-combat main phase, she doesn't pay the 1 to draw a card and passes. Sebastian draws 2 and takes 2. He plays a Field of Ruin and then taps enough for Muldrifter. With it entering, it draws him 2 cards and Nekusar deals 2 damage to him. Sebastian then passes, discarding down to 7. Maxwell draws 2 and plays an island. He casts Cherix the Raging Isle and doubles up on limiting combat with a crawl space. He then swings the Guilt Feeder at Kilby, who can't block. This triggers the Feeder's ability, and Kilby takes 2 from the cards in his graveyard. Kilby draws 2 and takes 2. He plays a Tap Myriad Landscape, and then goes at Marie, paying the 2. Before moving to blocks, Marie casts Nature's Claim and targets the Shadow Spear. Kilby responds to this by casting Anguished Unmaking and targets Ikra. Ikra is then exiled, with Kilby taking 3, but he gains 4 back as the spear is destroyed. Marie isn't as lucky though, gaining no life and taking the last few points of commander damage from Zurgo to knock her out. With nothing else, Kilby passes. Seb draws his 2 and takes 2. He plays an island and then taps enough for Mismeta Witch. He then plays out Soul Herder and moves to his end step, blinking the Muldrifter with a Soul Herder. The Drifter re-enters, and Seb draws 2 and takes 2 more, and the Soul Herder gains a +1/+1 counter. Maxwell plays a Mountain for turn, and then plays a Prince of Thralls. He swings the Guilt Feeder at Seb this time, and since it has Fear, Seb can't block. This has Sebastian losing 6 because of the number of cards in his graveyard, and Maxwell then passes. Kilby takes 2 as he draws 2. Kilby sacrifices his Myriad Landscape and loses 3 life, so Maxwell can't steal it with the Prince of Thralls. He casts Swiftfoot Boots and puts them onto Zurgo. Zurgo then goes at Maxwell, who takes the 7. Kilby then passes turn, discarding down to 7. Sebastian does the thing and takes 2, and then taps 2 from his temple and bounces it to his hand as he plays an Orzhov Basilica. He then uses one of the floating mana for a Soul Ring, and then casts Panharmonicon. He taps more mana for a Grey Merchant of Asphodel, which Maxwell is very quick to counter with Counterspell. Seb then moves to his end step, and blinks the Witch, adding another counter to the Soul Herder. Maxwell plays a Mystic Sanctuary, and puts back the Counterspell. He plays a Psychosis Crawler, and then taps enough for a Guard Gamazoa. He swings the Prince of Thralls at Kilby, who takes the 7. Kilby untaps and takes 2 from drawing, and then casts a Grisly Spectacle on the Thrall. With the Thrall dying, Maxwell has to mill his top 7 cards. Kilby then plays out a Death's Shadow, followed by a Darksteel Plate. He puts the plate onto the Shadow, and swings at Maxwell. Maxwell blocks Zurgo with the Guard Gamazoa, and Kilby then passes turn. Sebastian draws his 2 and takes 2. He replays the Temple of the False God as his land drop, and goes to combat. The Muldrifter pokes Kilby for 2, and Sebastian then taps enough for Austere Command in his second main phase. He picks both modes to destroy creatures, but it won't matter as Maxwell counters it. Technically, Maxwell used the counterspell, which should have been on top of his library, but had he realized that it should have gone on top instead of to his hand, he would have used the Swan Song instead. Sebastian then plays a Corpse Knight, and casts his commander, Aminatou. He downticks her to exile the Witch, which gives the Soul Herder a +1/+1 counter, and the Witch comes back immediately, and triggers the Knight, dealing 1 to his opponents. Sebastian then passes, and blinks the Witch again with a Soul Herder at the end of turn, which gives it another counter, and has the Knight dealing another 1 to his opponents. Maxwell plays an island, and taps a lot of mana for Ward of Bones in his main phase. He moves to combat, but doesn't see any good attacks, and passes. Kilby draws and takes 2 from Nekusar. In his main phase, he casts Kagamaro, and without missing a beat, sacrifices the demon. It gives all creatures on the field -5/-5, which has Death's Shadow and the Carrick's Living. Kilby then cracks the beacon to put Zurgo to hand and casts a Diabolic Tutor. He shortcuts first before tutoring, swinging the Shadow at Maxwell, who just blocks with Cherix, and he passes turn. Sebastian draws only the 1, and unfortunately that Ward of Bones is limiting what he can do. He plays a Floodplain which comes in tapped, and he can't really do what he wants. He upticks Aminatou, drawing a card and putting one back on top. He then drops Lithoform Engine and passes. Maxwell recasts Nekusar in his main phase and puts to stack Whispering Madness. Everyone then discards their hand and draws equal to the highest cards discarded, and Sebastian flashes out a Restoration Angel, who has no good target to blink, and the table then wheels. This has Sebastian and Kilby drawing 7 and losing 7, and Maxwell then ciphers the spell onto Cherix. He plays a Maze of Ith as his land for turn, and passes. Sebastian draws 2 and takes 2. He plays Brago in his main phase, and then a Plains. Sebastian then taps enough for a Ravenous Chupacabra, which he has come in and blow up both of Maxwell's creatures. He then says he'll go to combat, but Maxwell deals with whatever is being swung at him by tapping the maze. Maxwell recasts Nekusar in his main phase, and Sebastian cracks the Floodplain to go and find a land. He then uses Counterspell on Nekusar while it's on the stack, and once all that's done, Maxwell then plays out Feared Visions. He plays a Bajuka Bog which comes in tapped, and exiles Sebastian's graveyard. Maxwell then draws at the end of turn thanks to the visions, and passes. Sebastian draws for turn and swings the Restoration Angel and Brago at Maxwell. Maxwell uses the mace to untap Brago and takes the hit from the Restoration Angel. Sebastian then passes his turn, and at the end step draws a card from Fevered Visions, and then takes 2 damage from having 4 or more cards in hand. Maxwell untaps and draws. He pays 13 mana to recast Nekusar, and says he'll move through his phases. This has Sebastian in response, tapping 7 to overload Cyclonic Rift. Maxwell then moves to his second main phase, and casts Soul Ring, and then uses some more to cast Crawl Space. He then plays a tap Blood Crypt, and passes. At the end of turn, Sebastian sacrifices his Field of Ruin to blow up the Maze of Ith. This has both of them going to find a basic, and Maxwell then discards down to 7. Sebastian draws and goes to combat. Brago and the Restoration Angel go at Maxwell, who takes the hit. With the Brago hit triggering going on the stack, Sebastian uses some kind of wizardry involving the Lithoform Engine, his Soul Ring, the Commander Sphere, and the triggers to basically make infinite colored mana and colorless mana that dissipates once they move from combat. He doesn't have any instants though, so he's just doing this to show that he can, and we move to his second main phase. He casts a Perplexing Chimera, and then Yen it, and passes to Maxwell. Maxwell draws and pays 5 mana for Nekusar, which Sebastian decides to steal by swapping it for the Chimera. Maxwell then pays 3 for Fevered Visions again, and he realizes he thinks he's got the game by tapping a red and a black for Rakdos Charm. He picks the mode of having creatures each deal 1 to their controllers, which is enough to take Sebastian out and win Maxwell the game. Game review time! So in a deck like Zurgo, you really can't afford to be attacking willy-nilly, and you really want to focus on one player until they're dead. The downside of this is that people tend to see what you're doing, and also, the first person to get hit is typically who you're going to focus. In this game, Kilby had no choice but to focus on Marie. Marie's deck was pretty interesting, and I'm sad that we didn't get to see more of it, because Abzan Life Gain Matter seemed kind of fun. Ikra Shaddiq certainly helps fuel Tymna's ability, and I really liked how well the Heliod Sun Crown synergized with the whole deck. Considering what his opening hand was, I had very low expectations for Sebastian's deck early on, and was very pleasantly surprised to see him hanging around for so long. It almost seemed as if he was about to win at the end there, so that was pretty sweet to see. I don't have much to say about Maxwell's deck since it seemed like a very typical Nekusar deck, other than the fact that he seemed to have some decent mana early on, and he played the deck well. And it ran a lot of the cards that I've seen before in Nekusar decks. I did love the fact that he was able to win with a Rakdos Charm though, so extra points go to him for that. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.